Welcome back to another episode of Foxy TV. I am doing the intro today because this episode is all about, it's for home staging businesses, and it's trying to answer the question about logistics and whether you should have it in-house, where you own the truck, own the team, or whether you use an external removalist company, contractor to do that. I'm going to be going through some of the math. Obviously there's some numbers involved financially, so doing the math between the two and kind of giving some examples and things to consider. We're also going to touch on all the other stuff that needs to be considered when you're looking at this decision. All the pros and cons, the advantages that you get from having it in-house, all of those bits and pieces, that's what we're covering today. I'm going to start with the numbers. I'm going to put all the other stuff to the side. The rest is very important, but I think it's a good starting point to look at the numbers when you're looking at this decision about whether to have this team as a full-time employee, own the truck, or whether you're contracting. The numbers are a bit simpler. I think that's why it's a good place to start. And a lot of people, when they're considering this decision, it's a question that we get asked a lot from home stagers who are going through a bit of a growth phase, who don't yet own their own logistics team, but are thinking about it and want to know when to do it, whether it's going to be worth it. I think most people focus on the numbers. I think this can be simplified quite a bit. I will say up front that it depends on your situation. So the numbers that I'm going to be talking about in this example, probably my best guess at some of the numbers that we have, but everybody's going to be different, so it's important to put them in. To run through this and try and keep it as simple as I can, things that we need to consider when you are looking at when you own the team, what is it going to cost you to run that team for a day? Obviously, the difference between owning the team and using a contractor is that the contractor you pay for only the time that they work. For your team, especially if you're looking at full-time, which is what I'm kind of talking about, you're paying them regardless of whether they've got work to do or not. If you own a truck, you're paying for the truck whether it's busy or not. The things to look at when you're looking at the math for owning a team are obviously the truck itself. If you can get a truck secondhand, obviously that brings the numbers down. If you buy a new truck and you can get it on some sort of debt financing situation, then there's monthly payments, which is what we currently do. Then you can kind of figure out, well, if I know I'm paying $1,500 a month for this to service the debt on this truck, I can figure out on a daily basis what that is. The second thing is the team itself. So obviously you're going to have a couple of guys that you're going to need to run the truck. If you have two guys, you can figure out either an annual salary if they're full-time or an hourly rate if it's somewhere around maybe $30 an hour, plus or minus, depending on your market, depending on what experience levels you want. And you can kind of figure out, okay, for a full day, a 7.6 or an 8-hour day, for two guys at $30 an hour, I can calculate what that wage is. And then you need to factor in some of the smaller things like diesel. So, if we're running a truck and I have to pay for the diesel, tolls if you're in an area where you got to pay for tolls on those bigger roads. All of those things kind of get you to a number that says this is roughly what it costs me to run a truck in-house for one day. Then what you can do is take that number, and to give you an example, I've kind of run a very simple example here to say if I have two guys at $30 an hour for a full day, if I have a $1,500 payment for the truck monthly, I can calculate what that is per day. And if I put $50 diesel in, which again, plus or minus, depending on where you're going, I know that it can cost roughly, for this example, about $585 to run the truck for a day. Now, I know I'm not taking into consideration servicing or maintenance. That should be a factor, but I just want to keep it simple. That's the first part of the math, is to say if I know it roughly costs me $585 to run the truck for a day, then I can go and compare it to the contractor. And if I know that my external removalist option is $180 an hour, maybe you can get it cheaper in your area, maybe you can do $120 an hour. Some areas are more expensive. The one that we've used most often around here recently that are really good quality, they're fast, we're paying $180 an hour for them. So I can look at it and do simple math and say how many hours before it becomes more expensive to pay the external removalist versus just owning it. And so the answer for us is somewhere around 3 to 4-ish hours worth of work. At that point, I'm better off having my own team in-house do it. That's the simple math. It's just saying what's the cost if we own it, what's the cost if we don't for that day. I think that's important to have an idea of, but I don't think that's the most important part in answering the question of whether you should go down the path of getting your own team in-house. I think it comes down to a lot of the other things that are a bit more unknown, and I think that's why this question is one that comes up so often. It's not as simple as just running the math. Firstly, the obvious one is that contractors are there for just the time you need them. If I don't need them tomorrow, it's $0. I don't have to pay for them. If I have no work for the next 3 days, then I don't have to spend money on them. If the team is in-house, I have to pay those guys regardless. I have to pay for the truck no matter what. So it does come down to what kind of ambition you have, what sort of pipeline you have, whether you're looking to grow more, whether you think you have the work to sustain them. So when I do the simple math problem and say somewhere around 3 to 4 hours in a day, and it ticks over to being making more financial sense to own the team, then you can use that to say, well, do I have 3 to 4 hours worth of work on average every day? And if I do, then it makes way more sense to go down the owning it in-house route. Turning the contractors on and off is a big part of that. It's a commitment. It's that fear of, well, it's not only just the next 3 days that I might have to, pay somebody when I don't have the work. It's, well, if I've got somebody full time, I've bought the truck, I now have that truck permanently. It's a fixed overhead. It's not something that I can easily get rid of. Not to say that you can't. You can always, change your mind. You can sell your truck. You can change the way that your team structures and go back to a contractor, but it's a lot harder to do. The question is more of one for your business and to say, where are we at, where are we going, and what makes the most sense. A couple of things here that I've kind of noted that I wanted to make sure I touched on. There's some very significant advantages to having the team in-house, and I don't want to understate it. I really want to emphasize that there's a couple of reasons why, even when that math question starts to be like, I'm not 100% sure, so maybe I hold off, I think it's really important to understand the benefits you get from owning the team in-house. The first one is flexibility. At Foxy, a lot of the business that we've brought in and a lot of the growth that we've had has been all around how fast we are, how quickly we can change, how flexible we are, how quickly we can add in a job or change something on the run. Those things aren't as possible when you're relying on somebody else. So being able to say yes to things when you know that you can do it because it's your team and your truck, that has a huge impact on the things, on the growth of your business and on the reputation and deliverables and the service that you can give to your clients. If you have a good contractor, then you've obviously got some of that as well, but I think having full control really gives you that benefit. The second one is more around control of quality, of looking after the furniture, knowing that the people in your team, you have a little bit more control over who's in your team versus a contractor. It's just 2 guys that show up. And not to say that means that they're not on the same level as somebody in your own team, but it means that you don't have control over that, short of, I guess the only control you do have is to say, I'm not using you anymore. And then you've got to find someone else. Having control over the stock, over how they treat your furniture and accessories and artwork and all those things, how they represent you on site, you have control over it when they're in your own team. And that's been a big thing for us as well, is making sure that the people that are in our team know our values and can represent Foxy as a brand out on site when they're talking to clients or talking to agents. And we didn't feel like we had the same control over that when it was an external contractor. So I think those 2 big benefits are really worth considering when you're looking at the option or the decision. I'm now going to touch on the other side. One of the things that maybe isn't considered and should be when you're thinking about bringing it in-house, which might make you lean towards using a contractor team for a little bit longer, is that when you own the truck and you own that team, you're now responsible for the hiring and the training of those people and the managing of those people. And that can be a very positive thing to consider, that I now have that ability to bring in who I want and train them the way I want. And it is, but it's also a very difficult thing. And it's probably the one biggest challenge that we've had with having our logistics team in-house is finding the right people, keeping the right people and doing the training and all of those things. And we got lucky in that the first couple of guys that we got into our team were fantastic. They had the experience, they were perfect. We've since then had to start with people who had no experience, and that can also be good, but it means you have to go through that process of training. Some of them didn't work out to be the right people, and you kind of have to go through that recruitment. Whereas contractors, they're going to send 2 guys, and you can trust that they have some experience, and you can always ask that question and say, hey, how long have they worked? Are they going to be safe with carrying the furniture through people's houses, all that sort of thing. You don't have to worry about the training or the recruitment. You just know that you're paying for them to show up. So that is one thing that, not everybody likes the idea of managing people. Not everybody is probably capable of training people or talking through what they want in the logistics team, especially if you're the business owner and you're more on the styling side of things. You don't know how to teach that to new people, so you would have to recruit the right people to start with. But like I said, if you can get that right, it's a huge benefit. It's just going to be a challenge. One other it's a potential risk, but I would consider this very low risk. The only reason I mention it is because in the last year we've had a number of breakdowns with our trucks. That sort of thing where you have to actually get the trucks off the road for maintenance, servicing, repairs, that can impact your ability to do the work on a particular day. I think firstly, it's a small risk because it doesn't happen that often, and secondly, it's the sort of thing that at the time it's very stressful, but you can figure it out because you can hire trucks, you can get in external removalists for those periods of time. It's a solvable issue, but I mention it just because it is one of those things when same as having to hire or recruit and train your staff, If you own the truck, that's now your responsibility, whereas a removalist has an issue, they'll just have to figure out another truck. So I think there's some other things that we haven't touched on that are still part of this discussion and part of the consideration as to whether you're going to bring a logistics team in-house or whether you're going to keep the external removalist. What I've tried to do today is touch on the most important from my point of view. So the things that you need to consider when you're weighing up that option. I think the math is, like I said, the math is important to understand. I think it's one of those things that if you can simplify it, you can figure out what's it going to cost me to have it in-house for a day, what's it going to cost to do the removalist for a day. Play with that a little bit to understand, if I only have 2 hours worth of work, what does that look like for these guys? When I have a full day, what does that look like? But like I said, that's the starting point, and then you need to factor in all these other things. From my point of view, what we've kind of realized and learned over the years is, I think if your ambition is to grow, if you can see a team or a business, your business in the future, whether that's 6-12 months, where you have the warehouse with your internal team, I think those benefits that you get from bringing it in-house, I think they are very much probably the deciding factor if you're umming and ahhing. I think if you're umming and ahhing and you're planning to go down that path at some point, and that's where you see yourself going, I would say look at it sooner rather than later. I think the benefits that you get from bringing it in-house, if you have the work to sustain it and make it worth it financially, it's just a no-brainer. And we've, on the other side of it, every time that we've increased our capacity as a business, we've brought in a new truck or new people, we've always looked back and said that was a good decision and we maybe could have even done it earlier. Having said that, obviously everybody's situation is different. So I think it's, like I said, consider all the factors, put in all the numbers for your own situation, and hopefully it becomes a bit of an obvious answer for you. Thank you for watching this episode. If you have any questions, if you have any follow-up, if you have anything that you'd like to discuss further or maybe is a bit different for you than what I've talked about today, I'd love to hear it. Please leave some comments, reach out to us, happy to continue the discussion.